Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to congratulate once again BESA for conducting another interesting and important conference. I think that BESA was doing a remarkable job under the previous Ephraim in Bar, and now he's doing a remarkable job under another Ephraim Karsh. And thank you, Ephraim, for inviting me to this distinguished panel. I was asked by Ephraim to speak about the challenge of terrorism, with more specifically about the challenge of ISIS and current affairs, maybe even future affairs of terrorism, and that's what I intend to do in the coming minutes. But I would like to start with an argument that it's a generic argument that terrorism might be surprising to us, but terrorism is a fashioned business. It's a certain type of a fashion, if you wish. So although I don't get a dime from Coca-Cola, I would start with the advertisement that Coca-Cola used to have for so many years, in the 50s, the 60s. Now, some of you might remember what was the slogan that Coca-Cola always used. We are the real thing. Compared to whom? Pepsi, of course. So they always refer to themselves as the real thing. And I would argue that that concept of we are the real thing is the skeleton of the understanding of the evolution of modern terrorist organizations. Always a mother organization gives birth, unwillingly, to the real thing, which is more dogmatic than the previous one. We can start with the IRA, if you wish, move on to the provisional IRA, and then after the Good Friday deal, what we find is no less than the real IRA. That's the way they refer to themselves. We are the real IRA. PFLP, George Habash organization, gave birth to PFLP GC, PFLP General Command, the real thing. And who is this? This is Jibril organization. Fatah organization was actually in the process of being exchanged by the real thing, and Hamas became the real thing compared to, or becoming the real thing compared to Fatah. And I would like to argue that ISIS is now stepping in, or in the last few years been stepping in, becoming the real thing to what used to be Al-Qaeda. Now, when we understand this fashion concept, we can understand that ISIS is not what some of us tend to believe, a problem which has to do just with the Middle East, just with Syria or Iraq. Yes, this is the hub. I don't know, it's, there is a request to shut down some lights, if it's possible, then, but if not, we'll go on. So what we see is a phenomenon that actually spread all over the world. And we see today elements of ISIS, either proxies of ISIS, either other organizations that pledge their support with ISIS, or individuals or local networks all over the world. And just in order to imagine and to understand this situation, think about a balloon which is not full with air. And if you press in one part of it, the air pops up in another place. If you press in Syria and Iraq, the air is popping up where? We are all eager to know, probably in Africa. We have Yudit here, probably will speak about that. We see the growth of the ISIS element in Sinai. We see, of course, the activity of ISIS in Europe, the inspiration that they conduct there, and so on and so forth. And that's the way that we need to understand ISIS. It's here to stay. In this framework, in the other framework, hopefully it would be uprooted, at least militarily wise, down the road from Syria and Iraq. But the phenomenon, this current fashion of ISIS, I would argue, is not going to disappear. The second argument I would like to argue is that ISIS is what we call a hybrid terrorist organization. Now, what is a hybrid terrorist organization if we compare it to the classical terrorist organization? A hybrid terrorist organization is a terrorist organization that controls both territory and population. And therefore, a hybrid terrorist organization, almost by nature, is embedded within the civilian society. And you can imagine how difficult it is to contend and to fight and to counter a hybrid terrorist organization, especially for liberal democracies which are reluctant to use all the power that they have in order to uproot such an organization which is camouflaged and embedded within the civilian society. Now, until recently, this was the problem of only one nation in the world, Israel. And when we talked about the phenomenon of hybrid terrorist organization, I remember my recent book, when I sent it to Stanford University, and peer-reviewed and everything else, the case study was Hamas, and I was speaking about the concept of a hybrid terrorist organization. And one of the reviewers, if I knew him, I would kill him, but he actually said, no, I know. He said, this is nonsense, there is no such a thing as a hybrid terrorist organization, and Hamas, listen to that, is a questionable terrorist organization. I actually backed up my argument that the hybrid terrorist organization confused the world. Why? Because a hybrid terrorist organization is involved in both non-legitimate terrorist activity on one hand, and pseudo-legitimate activity giving services to the public on the other hand. And then some people are falling into that trap and refer to this terrorist organization as a questionable terrorist organization. Now, we used to deal, and we are still dealing with two hybrid terrorist organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, typical two hybrid terrorist organizations. Like it or not, there is another hybrid terrorist organization, and it's called ISIS. ISIS controlled territory, ISIS controlled population, ISIS embedding itself within the Syrian and Iraqi society, and therefore ISIS is posing to the world the same dilemmas that we as a liberal democracy have dealt with in the recent decades, in reference to those two countries altogether. Fatah, of course, used to be, if you go to the past, even IRA, there were others. I'm not saying that those are the only two. But Fatah right now is a different creature in this regard, at least in my view. To show the hybridity of the organization, you could see how ISIS practically established itself with two arms. The first arm is the military arm. I'll show it in a moment, but this is the civilian arm, which is based on governors of different areas in Iraq, in Syria, that their responsibility is to give those services to the public. Food supply, water supply, education, law enforcement, and so on and so forth. And of course, it also has to do with a very sophisticated, I would say, structure, military structure of the organization based on the shuras, on the committees that other Islamist terrorist organizations also adopt all the time. Now let's move on and speak about the war in Syria and the current situation, the war against ISIS in this regard. President Obama and his administration decided and actually declared in August 2014 no less than a war on ISIS. Dempsey and Hegel were saying, we are at war with ISIS. But at the same time, President Obama said, and Eyal mentioned that, President Obama said, yes, but no boots on the ground. You can imagine that he didn't consult with me, nor with any other Israeli probably. Because every Israeli that knows something about hybrid terrorist organization and fighting against hybrid terrorist organization would tell him that there is no way to win a war, if you are a liberal democracy, against a hybrid terrorist organization without boots on the ground, without ground operation. Only with ground operation you can uproot the military structures of those organizations. I said, if you're a liberal democracy, because if you don't give a damn about liberal democratic values, you don't care about collateral damage, you don't care about proportionality, oh, you can do miracles. Don't get me wrong, I'm not recommending to do all of the above. But I'm just describing the situation. So from my point of view, when I listened to President Obama in 2014 saying I'm at war with ISIS and no boots on the ground, I understood that I'm at war with ISIS and I decided not to win the war. That's the only explanation I can give to this declaration. Now, okay, you decided no boots on the ground, so probably you are going to have a very effective and intensive air campaign. To give you some numbers, in the first year, the coalition led by United States have launched about somewhere between 3 to 5 airstrikes a day, to compare with the Israeli operations in Gaza. In protective edge operation, Israel have launched about 167 airstrikes a day. And the previous one, previous operation, 187 strikes a day. And who can compare the territory of Gaza to the territory that ISIS control in Syria, in Iraq, and so on and so forth? So even if you are secluding yourself and you're saying, no, I'm focusing only on airstrikes, this is ridiculous. Doesn't mean anything. But maybe the quality of the airstrikes was very good. So let's check that. In September, the 23rd of September 2014, in the Pentagon, there was a media conference. By the way, I showed this slide in the Pentagon, and I thought that they would not let me out of United States, but they were very gentle with me. The Pentagon spokesperson is giving information about the previous night, the American-led activity, military activity, against ISIS. And in one of the success of the activities, he shows the ISIL, at the time it was called ISIL, Finance Center in Raqqa, that was destroyed by the American air campaign the night before. Now, my friends, you don't need to be an intelligence officer in order to compare the before and after pictures that he showed, not me, on the same media conference. Nothing was destroyed. No building, no floor, no window was destroyed. There was a little fire out at the roof of the building after the airstrike. This is really the way to fight terrorism. Now, you would say, what does he know? He's a professor from university. What does he know? So I want to give a bigger authority that criticizes the American campaign, the efficiency of the American campaign against ISIS. The bigger authority is our neighbors from the north. I want to show you a caricature that we took from Hezbollah website that actually described the American efficiency, the air campaign against ISIS. That's the way Hezbollah referred to the American campaign against ISIS. Well, a vacuum doesn't stay in the Middle East for a long period of time. And the vacuum that was created by President Obama in this administration was filled in with the Russians that took a great advantage of and the opportunity for that, for this existence of this vacuum. And they came, and again, Eyal was right, not with a lot of power, not with a lot of firepower, but with the determination to change the situation regardless how many casualties they would cause. Carpet bombing, Russian known strategy that no liberal democracy can adopt, definitely not United States. Again, I'm not suggesting to adopt that, but what the Russians succeeded to do in 3 months, United States didn't succeed to do in 3 years in reference to that challenge. So what should we expect that would be the new policy of President Trump? I'm telling my students, in the Middle East, never give any prediction. And if you give predictions, always give them for long term, not for short term. Why? Because in the long term, nobody would remember what you said, and if it was wrong, nobody would remember that. But you can always say, I said it and show that you said it. In the short term, everybody will remember what you said. So I'm now ruling my own rule, and I want to give, not a prediction, but a few scenarios, possible scenarios, of the American policy, counterterrorism policy against ISIS, Trump administration in Syria. Actually, I would like to suggest 4 different possible scenarios. 3 of them I don't think that Trump would adopt, but I would just erase them and eliminate them. The 4th one I believe he would adopt, and I think it would be a mistake. And I would suggest the 5th one for him. So, very briefly, the first option for President Trump is to do something along the lines of what President Obama did. A little bit more lip service, maybe more strikes, but really doesn't do anything that will change the situation in the field itself. I don't think he would adopt that. He promised that he won't do that. I believe him. So I don't think that this would be another version of President Obama activity in Syria and Iraq. The second option is that he would say, okay, I still, as he mentioned that already, I still not going to put any boots on the ground, but I'm going to change my airstrike attitudes and doctrines, and I'm going to adopt something along the lines of the Russian airstrikes, maybe lesser than that. I don't think that he would adopt that because I don't think that the American liberal society nor the Western countries would be able to accept the outcome of American-led carpet bombing and changing Raqqa, for example, or Mosul to what the Russians and the Iranians and the Turks did in Hama, for that, in Aleppo, for that matter. So I actually dismiss this option as well. The third option is boots on the ground, sending battalions, brigades, sending tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and starting a large ground operation in Syria. Well, I don't think he would do that as well. I think it's against the rationale of building the economy of the United States. You know how you start it, you don't know how you end it. It can last for a long period of time. It will definitely hurt the American economy and a lot of casualties, American casualties. I don't think he would adopt it. I think he would adopt the 4th option. And the 4th option, I call it the option of the businessman. Now, what is the option of the businessman? The option of the business, how business people are doing or conducting business. They set a goal that they want to achieve, and they are looking for the track and to achieve this goal with the least price that they can pay. The goal is quite clear. Uproot ISIS from Syria and Iraq. What could be perceived as the least cost, how to achieve that by Trump, is actually closing his eyes, closing his ears, closing his nose and mouth, turn his head away and tell to the Russians, go for it, do it. I'm going to give you a window of 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, just do the job for me. I tend to believe that they would happily do that. But I think that maybe it's not costly for the short period of time. For the American interest, it has many costs, unperceived costs in the long term. Because United States influence and prestige in the Middle East is down the drains today as an outcome of Obama foreign policy. And if Trump would adopt this policy, it will even hurt much more the American hegemony worldwide, but definitely in the Middle East. If in the recent years we saw delegations traveling from Cairo, from Amman, from Saudi Arabia, not to DC, to Moscow, that's actually a very bad sign for the American foreign policy. You know, a few weeks ago, there was a summit in Moscow. And in the summit, there were the foreign ministers of Turkey, Russia, and Iran. And I was interviewed by the Israeli radio the day after, and the interviewer asked me, what are you saying about this summit of hypocrisy? And I asked him, why are you referring to that as a hypocrisy summit? He said, because, you know, they are talking about counterterrorism, and they are all archi-terrorists. I said, I wouldn't use the term hypocrisy to describe this summit in Moscow. I would describe this summit as the summit of humiliation. Humiliation of United States. Because in this summit and the further summits in Moscow, the future of Syria and maybe Iraq will be decided. And the Americans not only did not host this summit, are not being even invited to the summit. That shows the downgrade of the American influence in the Middle East and globally altogether. So what should be the policy of President Trump, in my view? The policy that I would recommend him to adopt is, you know what? You want to change the situation, you set the goal to uproot ISIS, you want to be effective, and you want not to deteriorate your situation. I understand the policy of no boots on the ground. I think that the Americans shed enough of their blood in order to protect others around the world. I would definitely intensify the quality and the quantity of the airstrikes, not to the level, God forbid, which is conducting non-proportional collateral damage, but still you have a lot of room there until the limits of what the Geneva Conventions permits a liberal democracy at times of war. So definitely I would intensify my air campaign. But the second thing I would say, if no boots on the ground, then at least sandals on the ground. And what do I mean by sandals on the ground? Not sending brigades and battalions and ground operations, but special operation activity on a daily basis, tailor-made against ISIS. It could be, based on the Israeli experience, could be very effective and actually achieve the goals that he wants to achieve. Thank you very much.